Why are you being all Gulf Coasty? What's the matter with you? Want me to show you where your friends are? I can do that. I'm scrounging for forks.
Okay.
Welcome back to Whoopsie Daisy Farm, and today we're going to do something a little different. You may have noticed on my Instagram account or Facebook if you follow me there that recently we have discovered that we can add fresh ground flour to Kyle's diet in the form of ancient grains. He still can't do modern wheats, and so if you are in the fresh ground flour community, everyone says start with hard red and hard white wheat, and Kyle cannot process those. So we mainly do ancient grains at this point, and he needs it to be fermented, so it's either a soaked grain or a sourdough. Which, again, if you're in the fresh ground flour community, everyone says do not start with sourdough or soaked grains. Do yeast stuff first, but Kyle can't digest that. So I have dived whole hog in the deep end with both feet into fresh ground flour, and I decided today that I will take you along while I experiment and explore some new grains and a new recipe, and just kind of figure out the consistency of fresh ground flour. The biggest learning curves people have is with fresh ground flour, it absorbs moisture completely different than store-bought flour. So you'll see behind me, I have my mock mill. I started off with a KitchenAid attachment, and there is definitely a place in this world for KitchenAid attachments, grinders. But for the amounts that we needed to do, and especially with the emphasis on ancient grains that Kyle needed us to do, I decided to upgrade to a mock mill because it has a lot more variety in the grind settings. And so with things like kamut or corazon, where the older grains have that harder bran, the different settings helps because I can grind it on a coarse setting and then put it back through the grinder and do it on a fine setting, and that helps make a much more smooth, fine flour that is easier for me to work with. So very thankful for the mock mill. We have found, again, we have to avoid yeast, so I am either soaking my grains or fermenting it in the form of sourdough. So today I want to take you along as I make some kamut, barley, duck egg, sheep milk ravioli for Kyle. I don't have a written recipe, I'm sorry. I was actually taught by Eastern Europeans how to cook, so nothing was exact measurements. Like, we didn't use cups and teaspoons and tablespoons. They taught me based off of consistency and feel, and you know the dough is right when it does this. So for those of you who want an exact recipe, I am sorry, I don't have one. So I would like to get one at some point and share that with you, but for right now, please just enjoy the journey with me while I add ingredients and test for consistencies and learn how this dough and flour works and make delicious food at the end result. Our recipe journey begins with about a half a cup of kamut berries. This doesn't have to be exact because I'm still playing with the recipe. And then I'm going to add in about a third of a cup of purple barley. For this kind of a pasta, I want a really nice fine flour, so I'm going to run the grains through on the coarse setting and then run the grains through again on the finest setting. Here you can see the barley and the kamut are separate, but then when I put it through the grinder a second time, it all gets mixed together, so I don't really have to worry about mixing it up. Now I'm going to add a little bit of my kamut sourdough starter. You don't have to do this, but just it adds to the digestibility of the end result pasta. So I like adding sourdough. It also adds some nice flavor. And then I'm going to start off with one duck egg just because I wasn't quite sure how the barley and kamut would play together at this point as far as moisture goes. I like to add some olive oil to my pasta, so I'm going to add that and then just mix it all in and see what happens. Now, you do also have to be mindful with fresh ground flour that you really need to do an amylase step, which I didn't do very well with this particular batch of pasta. So the dough ended up being really super duper dry, and I ended up adding a little bit more sourdough starter, and then I did go ahead and add more oil on the second duck egg, which ended up giving me a very wet, sticky dough at the end. So I learned that next time I make this, it's okay to let all the liquids and the grains just sit in the bowl for an hour or so that the grains soak up all that moisture, and then knead everything and see how it does, because that soaking, sitting step is called an amylase. And with hard red or hard white wheat, or just modern wheats, the amylase step can be a lot shorter. The modern grains will soak up the moisture and the liquids a lot faster than the ancient grains. The ancient grains have tougher bran, so with the ancient grains, you really want to do the amylase step for an hour or so. Make sure everything's soaked it up. You can see in these video clips the dough really started off super duper tough, and I'm really having to work it. Now, another tip with fresh ground flour that I learned is that instead of using flour on your work surface while you knead, just use some water. Put some water on your hands, put it on your countertop, and that will help the grains continue to absorb moisture. It'll make it for a much more wet dough, and your end result won't be nearly as dry and crumbly, and it just makes it easier to work with dough, like you can see here. So I want to get the dough to where it's about the Play-Doh consistency you can see here. Then I cover it and let it sit anywhere from a couple of hours to overnight. I like a cheesy ravioli, so I'm going to use this Clabber cheese that I experimented with from my sheep milk, and then also some homemade Manchego from my sheep. The Clabber cheese was an experiment where I was trying to see if I could do a natural fermented feta type cheese, and it's good. It just was a very strong flavor, so I decided to mix it with a more milder tasting Manchego, and the combination was delicious. I added about 2 tablespoons of butter to the cup of shredded cheese. You don't want it hot, you just want it melted, so that when you pour it over the cheese, it just kind of ties everything together in a delightful, sheepy, nutty, buttery goodness. You don't have to add the butter. You could just put little scoops of shredded cheese on it, but these two cheeses seem to need something to tie them together, and then that way I could just pull off little bits of the cheese mixture and place it in the dough when I'm ready to punch out my ravioli. Alright, so here I'm going to give my dough a final knead before I let it rest for several hours. And so here you can see where the dough's had that amylase process. It became so much more pliable. It wasn't sticky, it was just very Play-Doh-y, which apparently is my analogy of choice for this particular video, Play-Doh. So, it was very Play-Doh-y and easy to work with. So, again, next time I will not continue adding so much liquid, because you need the dough to be a little tougher before it soaks overnight. Now, here's where the beauty of the sourdough starter kicks in. You can see that the dough rose a little bit, and it's got some nice air bubbles in it, which, again, I'm not looking for much rise with this dough. I'm not adding the sourdough for the rising properties. I'm adding it for the fermentation to make the grains easier to digest. So I'm going to just knead it one more time to get all that fluffiness back out of it, and then make sure the dough is nice and pliable before I roll it out to begin the noodle making process. I'm kneading it here just to make sure that the dough's kind of woken up, the elasticity is there, and then I'm going to cut it into a couple different sections just so that it's easier to work with. So I began this process with my great-grandmother's rolling pin, which has ball bearings in it. This will not be super easy if you get just a regular cheap rolling pin from Walmart or another big box store. You need like a baker's rolling pin, something that's a little bit heavier. So I honestly rarely finish my noodle making process with a rolling pin, just because this kind of a dough is going to break apart pretty easily when you pull it up off the countertop, and you really need a nice, cohesive, smooth dough. So I'm a great proponent of noodle makers, which I'll show you in a minute. If you don't have a noodle maker and have no interest in getting one, you might want to play with your dough a little bit by either adding more oil to it or not adding a tougher grain like barley to it. You may want to just stay with the wheat family and add oil and have lots of rests between each rolling pin pass to make sure that it stays really nice and flexible. So here you can see I'm giving it my best shot because I really wanted to show you how to do this with just a rolling pin, but eventually I did go ahead and just gave up and got out the noodle maker that I bought when I was doing mission work in Romania. I will have a link in the description to a similar noodle maker that's available on Amazon. I just haven't tried that particular one because, like I said, I bought mine in Romania about 20 years ago. There is also a company called Norpro that our local Amish general store gets their baking supplies from, and Norpro has a noodle maker that looks very similar, if not identical, to this. So I really like it. It just screws on your countertop. It is hand cranked. It's great when you have toddlers. They can help you, or if they are down for a nap, then you can just whip it out. You can get motorized noodle makers or KitchenAid attachments as well. This is just what I have, and I really like it, so it's what I'm using. Here you can see the dough was still a little bit choppy, but I just folded it back over itself, squished it down, and ran it through the noodle maker again. And the noodle maker kind of functions as a kneading step where it's kneading the dough and making it more elastic and also rolling it to the thinness that you want. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 process, and it just makes for a nicer, even pasta that is so much more easy to work with, especially when you're doing a specialty pasta like ravioli. I'm not looking for perfectly smooth edges in the dough. I'm looking for a very smooth pasta, and I'm making sure that it can go to a thinner setting and not have holes in it because the grains have absorbed enough moisture and been kneaded enough to where they can be elastic. So this one looks pretty good. So with this pasta maker, you adjust the thickness settings on the left and then crank it on the right. I was taught to make pasta by a woman in Romania where you start with bits of dough and you start at the thickest setting first. You roll all your pieces out, and that's given the first bit of dough you worked with time to rest. You adjust the setting to a thinner setting, and then you roll it from there. With store-bought flour, I try to get the noodles as thin as possible for a very delicate culinary experience, but with the fresh ground flour, after making it a couple of different times with a couple of different flour combinations, I've decided that I'm going to go down to the second to last thinnest setting on the pasta maker because the grains really need that structure of the pasta thickness in order to remain intact when I am cooking the ravioli at the very end. So maybe as I continue to play with this, I'll get the recipe just right to where I can make super delicate, super thin raviolis, but for now, I just leave it on the next to last thinness setting, and it's still very tasty. And for those of you who are wondering, this is what I do with the dough when it's waiting for a thinner setting through the pasta maker. I put it on some wax paper on a baking sheet that I will then use the wax paper to freeze the extra raviolis with. And you can just put it straight on the counter, but you want to make sure there's a little bit of oil or water between the dough and the countertop. I wanted it done this way so I could move through it pretty quickly. Alright, so once you have your pasta dough to the thinness that you want to work with it, you put it on your counter and start taking that delicious cheese concoction that we made earlier with the butter and start putting it on your dough. Now, I have a ravioli stamp, which is just like a cookie cutter. You absolutely do not need to have a ravioli stamp. I just like the fact that it makes ravioli shapes the way I grew up eating them from Sam's Club. But you can use a cookie cutter, you can just use a knife and cut it out if you want to. You can use a little contraption that looks like a pizza cutter made for cutting out pasta. You really just need a way to make sure that the two pieces of dough are stamped together so they don't fall apart in the cooking process, and also make the shapes you want for your little raviolis. So really the sky is the limit. I decided I wanted my filling to be a little bit closer to the edges of the raviolis, but you can keep the filling in towards the center and have it mostly noodle. Really, this is the part where your creativity can absolutely shine. The main thing is just make sure both parts of the dough are stuck together so they don't fall apart in the boiling process. Otherwise, you will just have regular pasta and very cheesy water and not ravioli. As you cut the raviolis out and move them to where you're going to cook them, you'll notice you'll have a lot of extra dough. You can roll this back out and make more ravioli with it, or you can cut them into noodle shapes and make just regular pasta with it and have 2 meals out of the price of one. So I found with fresh ground flour, I can re-roll it once, maybe twice, and then the dough just gets too tough and I have to turn it into just regular noodles, but they are still very tasty noodles. So it's a win-win either way. Also, until you get your dough consistency and thinness perfected for your kitchen and your environment, just go over your raviolis the first time and make sure there's no holes in the ravioli where the filling is. I found that sometimes the filling can punch holes in it and I have to just patch the raviolis or smooth the dough back. So anyway, I put them on that baking sheet with the wax paper until I was ready to put them in boiling water. Now, I grew up with ravioli from Sam's Club, and the package said to boil for 2 to 3 minutes until the ravioli floated on top, and that's when you know they were done. With these fresh ground flour raviolis, they floated right away. So I set the timer and boiled them for about 5 to 7 minutes. I started off with 4 to 5 minutes and that just wasn't long enough. They ended up being al dente, which I know some people like. I do not prefer that. I want my raviolis soft and squishy. So I simmered them for about 5 to 7 minutes. I put a little bit of olive oil in there, and then I actually manually flipped the raviolis about halfway through the simmer time just because I wanted to make sure both sides got equally cooked. Once your cook time is complete, just remove the raviolis from the simmering liquid with a slotted spoon and make sure you really jiggle them around, and you can see here the difference in the color between the dough of the uncooked ravioli and the cooked ravioli. There'll be kind of a different sheen and color to the dough once it's fully cooked. Also, make sure that you jiggle the slotted spoon quite a bit when you're pulling the raviolis out of the simmering water, because for some reason this dough really likes to trap puddles of water, and it ended up in my eating bowl, which led to a very watery butter or sauce, and I did not prefer that. So just make sure you get all the water off your raviolis before you serve it. All right, y'all, so we have these amazing sheep milk cheese, fresh ground flour, barley and kamut, duck egg ravioli. I grew up eating ravioli from Sam's Club that came in a big bag in the frozen section, and those noodles were very, very delicate, and these are definitely not like those. There's a lot more body to the noodle and a lot more flavor and a lot more nutrition. So if you're looking for an exact replacement from the frozen stuff at the store made with white flour that's mass produced to these, it's not going to be the same thing. But, you know, really nothing that's farm fresh is going to be an exact comparison. I mean, I remember the first time we started drinking raw milk, and it was like, this is so different from what's at the store. But it's not. It's like, it tastes like milk. It's the same thing, but it's also different. So it's the same thing with these. Like, they're not exactly the same, but it's still ravioli. So I did just want to give you that disclaimer. Now, I will eat these with just some butter melted on top and a little bit of cream drizzled on it. Or like I said before, you can make an actual roux and a white sauce or a cheese sauce or a tomato sauce. Like, really, the sky's the limit. Or, you know, you can just do butter and just eat these plain like this. So but they are so hearty. You can make a meal just of these noodles. You really don't need any kind of meats or anything like that. Like these could be the main dish. Now, I did want to make sure and point out that when you are boiling your fresh ground flour noodles, be sure and save that water. You can see here, like this is actually some of the flour from the noodles that has soaked down. There's a little bit of olive oil from where I put that in to cook the noodles. Anyway, I will use this to feed my sourdough starter instead of water, and it has really helped my sourdough starter stay strong and healthy. Well, in Kentucky, we have a lot of natural molds and fungi just in the air, and so making sure I have the right beasties in my ferments is a very important thing that I have to be careful with. So feeding my sourdough starter with noodle water has really helped keep the right bacteria and fungi and all that kind of stuff in my starter so that I don't have to. All right, so by the time everything was all said and done, this recipe actually made over 3 dozen raviolis, and these are actually quite filling. Between the high protein of the whole grains and the high protein of the duck eggs, and then the protein of the olive oil and the cheese that's being filled with it. Like, I think Kyle eats maybe 6 in a meal, and I eat 4 or 5, and Nat will eat anywhere from 2 to 8 because he's a toddler and that's what they do. So I'm actually going to freeze quite a bit of these. I've let these dry for a little bit, but you can tell they're still pretty flexible. I'm actually going to slide the freezer paper in to the plastic bag just so that there is some stability in the freezer until they are frozen solid. So you don't have to do that. I'm going to, just because my freezers, like everything else in my life right now, are a little chaotic, and so you can do what you want when you are doing this at home, but I'm gonna do that real quick and freeze at least a quarter of what I've made. So just be encouraged that while this is a lot of upfront work, you are going to benefit from these for a couple of meals if you're portioning them out right. It won't take long to thaw out. You can cook it and make a nice sauce to put on top of it, like a really quick roux or a tomato-based sauce, and you still have a really nourishing meal for your family. And for those who are worried, I have not forgotten about the fermented garlic video. It is coming. It's just taking a little bit longer than I originally thought, just with the weather getting cooler and, you know, fall prep for the farm. The fermentation is taking a little bit longer, and also I didn't get it started right when I wanted to. So it is coming, so don't worry. You will get your fermented garlic tutorial. I'm actually excited because I've got a treat. I'm gonna do several different ways of fermenting garlic for you all. So actually you can see back there, some of those jars are garlic fermenting, not the black garlic, but other garlic ferments. So I'm really excited to get that out to you soon. In the meantime, let me know if you try making your own ravioli, and if you do, what grains did you use? What kind of flour did you use? What kind of eggs did you use? What kind of cheese did you use? You can use regular flour for this if you want to. You'll have to adjust your moisture content with the eggs and the oil and whatnot. You can also use regular chicken eggs instead of duck eggs, but again, you'll have to adjust maybe some oil because there's a bit more water in chicken eggs than duck eggs, and the fats are different in those two eggs. I mean, you can also use quail eggs, you can use goose eggs, you can use turkey eggs. I mean, I've made some very nice noodles with my quail eggs too, just not these. And then you can also use any kind of cheese you want. So I use sheep milk cheese because that's what Kyle can digest, but you can use goat milk, you can use cow milk, you can use water buffalo milk, any kind of milk you want, any kind of cheese you want. So this is just basically like, you know, a basic recipe, and that's why I didn't give a lot of specifics, because you can adjust this to go with whatever you're producing on your farm as far as dairy or eggs or whatnot, and whatever flour you have available. So again, the main thing is just pay attention to your dough consistency and your moisture if you're playing with the flours or the eggs. And then with the cheeses, you may have to add a little bit more or less butter depending on how firm you want that filling. So thanks for coming with me, guys, and joining me in my very messy used kitchen and exploring fresh milled flour and how to make delicious treats for Kyle while we're still dealing with food sensitivities, and we'll see you on the next video.
Yummy food.
Salute.
So, how much would we have to pay for this in a restaurant?
Like $45 or something
wow.
ridiculous per plate, if not 70.
We don't go to that type of place for
We
70.
can't afford it. Is it good?
Just real afraid it would have Bailey.